Welcome back to part 2 of our Chapter 8 discussion around receivables. In this video, we're going to go over the calculation for the estimate of bad debts. There's two methods to go about doing this. The first I call the easy way. It's just kind of basic and simple and straightforward. It's not really easy, really. It's just straightforward. And it's the percentage of sales method. You will see this is their formula. Take credit sales times the bad debt percentage equals the amount of the estimate. Again, it's that simple. The questions I see from students and the students that get the most hung up on this method are the ones that are kind of conflating it with the next method, which is more involved and a little more difficult. And students end up asking, like I've had a student, actually had a student ask me today in class. She said, I see the credit sales, but what about this? And I was like, it's simple. It's just credit sales times the percentage and you're done. Don't get too far into it. Don't fall into the trap of kind of making the problems harder than they are. There will be some challenging problems in this chapter. The percentage of sales methods are not those challenging problems. They're easy. Keep it easy. Here's an example. If we had $120,000 in credit sales and we had an estimated bad debt percentage of 0.75%, then we would have $900 as our estimated bad debt expense. Keep in mind, we are doing this in a classroom setting. The real process of estimating bad debt percentages is not that easy. Having to look at the historical data and having to go through and make all these estimates is not an easy process done in the real world. But we're going to be handing you these percentages and you just have to calculate them. Our journal entry for this example, we've already done this. It's the same journal entry we did before in video 1. It's a debit to bad debt expense, credit to the allowance for bad debts. And move on. Now, if only it was that easy. Now we go to our second way to go about this. And so what has been called the accounts receivable method, I'll call it the hard method. The textbook splits it up into two methods, the percentage of receivables and the aging of receivables. I don't really think there are two methods. It's really the same, only we're going to use two different calculations, two potential ways to calculate. So basically, you're either going to have to calculate yourself the percentage of revenues, or you're going to have to calculate yourself using aging. I believe there might be a homework aging problem, but there's nothing on the exam about aging in terms of actually doing the whole aging process. If you Google aging of accounts receivable, what you'll basically see is companies categorize their accounts receivable. Most accounting systems do this for you. My old job, we would print a report and it would show us how much of our accounts receivable is over 180 days old. How much of it's between 45 or between 90 and 180? How much of it's between 45 and 90? And then we could take that data of how old our accounts receivable is and kind of get a better picture for how much of it's actually bad. But that's the point. The point is to estimate how much of our accounts receivable isn't any good. We think this accounts receivable is not any good. That's essentially what we're doing. And it'll be either a percentage of receivables or using aging. And once you get that estimate, that figure for how much of your accounts receivable is bad, then here comes the tricky part. We're going to look at our balance for the allowance for the bad debts, and then we're going to use an entry to make the allowance equal the calculated amount. I'm going to say it one more time, then I'm going to hit next, and we're going to see an example. Hopefully that'll help make more sense. We're going to use our calculation, either percentage of receivables or aging, to establish a number that is the reflection of how much bad accounts receivable we have in our accounts receivable account, our estimate of that much. And then we're going to look at our balance for the allowance for bad debts, and then we're going to use an entry to make the allowance equal the number we just calculated. Let's look at an example. So here we're starting with a pretty basic, simple situation. We have accounts receivable balance of $400,000. We have allowance for bad debts of $2,500, which would look like this. Again, it's a contra asset account with a natural credit balance. And in this scenario, we're going to estimate that 1% of receivables are uncollectible. In other words, we are estimating that 4,000 of our AR is bad. It's not any good. We aren't going to take it out because we don't exactly know which one is bad, and so we're just kind of looking at it as an estimate. And our allowance for bad debts looks like this. I'm flashing the number. That's where the 4,000 goes. So before, with percentage of sales, we would have put the 4,000 up here. If this was a percentage of sales problem and we'd had credit sales of 400,000 and 1%, the 4,000 would go up here. But this is an accounts receivable problem, and so because we're using accounts receivables to estimate, we put the number down here. And then the question is, how do we get from 2,500 to 4,000? And the answer is pretty easy, hopefully, for you. We're just going to increase it by 1,500. And our journal entry is the same in the fact that we're debiting bad debt expense and crediting allowance for bad debt. But the key is we're going to be debiting and crediting 1,500, not 4,000. The most common mistake students make on the AR problems is they do the first step well, the percentage of sales, they got this, and then they apply that same process to the AR problems, and that is not how it works. So instead, it should look like this. We should have a debit of 1,500 to the bad debt expense, a credit to the allowance for bad debts for 1,500 as well. This is the entry we would make for this scenario, because we're trying to get the allowance for bad debts to be this amount, 4,000. That's the whole key. We're trying to get from here to here. The only way to do that is with 1,500. Now, worksheet 2, a couple things I want to talk to you about worksheet 2. Worksheet 2 has two problems. One is problem number 1 is basically year 1 of the problem. Problem number 2 is year 2 of the problem, and they are directly linked to each other. And so make sure that you have a pretty good solid understanding of what's happening with that year 1 piece, both questions in year 1, before you move on to year 2. I might even suggest looking at the solution for year 1 before you move on to number 2, just to make sure you're on the right track. Hopefully that will help you. Good luck, and as I've told you many times, take a break when you're done before you move on to video 3. Talk to you later.